Coming up on Philosophy Talk, Pragmatism, Radical Empiricism, The Will to Believe.
The Philosophy of William James.
William James gave us the stream of consciousness, and with it, the possibility of the stream of consciousness novel.
From William James to James Joyce.
Well, you know, don't you, Kenneth, or haven't I told you, every telling has a tailing, and that's the he and the she of it. Philo.
What's true is what works.
If pragmatism is America's philosophy, then William James is America's philosopher.
The tender-minded philosophers versus the tough-minded philosophers.
Can I decide, as James thought, to believe in God, even if the evidence is against it?
Our guest is Russell Goodman from the University of New Mexico.
The Philosophy of William James. Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
After the news.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of KALW San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that began at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
Today, the philosophy of William James.
William James is one of America's greatest philosophers. His career spanned the turn of the 20th century. He was actually teaching at Stanford at the time of the 1906 earthquake.
You know, John, I know that James has this reputation as one of the great philosophers, but I've read a bit of James, and I wonder if that reputation is really deserved. Is reading James like reading Hume, Kant, Aristotle? You know, they're in complete control of all their ideas, mostly.
Well, yes and no. First, I should point out that James, like you, was deeply interested in psychology and philosophy, and he was actually a member of both departments at Stanford, psychology first. And his great works in psychology, the Varieties of Religious Experience, the Principles of Psychology, 2-volume work, they are really fascinating, wonderful, rich. He's non-doctrinaire. He's full of insights and empirical observations. It's really great. The philosophy, on the other hand, I'm a bit like you, but by contemporary standards of rigor, it's a little disappointing, although it's always full of ideas.
You're right, and one of the ideas that runs through all of his works is this thing he called pragmatism. What did he mean by that?
Well, he meant a lot of things by it, but two main things. One pretty plausible, one, by my lights, not so plausible.
Well, let's start with the plausible one. Give him the benefit of the doubt here.
Well, that's the pragmatic theory of meaning. James illustrates it with a story. The story's kind of implausible. Some campers are having an argument about the following situation. A squirrel is running around a tree in a certain direction. A man, for undisclosed reasons, is following the squirrel around the tree in the same direction. Both the squirrel and the man are clearly going around the tree. But is the man going around the squirrel? He must be, since he's going around in a circle and the squirrel is inside of the circle. But he must not be, because if you go around a squirrel, you should first see the squirrel's back, and then the side, and then his front, and the man just sees his back the whole time.
Well, that's not what the guys I go camping with. We don't worry about that kind of thing on our camping trips.
Well, I sympathize, but James apparently hung around with a more intellectual crowd. Anyway, according to James, there was a spirited argument about whether it was true or not that the man went around the squirrel. Maybe they had been drinking. But,
yeah.
But anyway, James pointed out that the two hypotheses, that the man goes around the squirrel and that he does not, don't lead to different observable consequences.
Right, so he asked his friends, what evidence, what observation would show that one hypothesis was correct and the other incorrect, and despite their heated argument, they couldn't come up with anything, with any difference, and so he convinced them that they were really arguing, in their drunken stupor maybe, about nothing, after all.
Exactly, and the way James thought of it was a question as well, what work do these hypotheses do in predicting the future? Work, that's where the idea of pragmatism comes from. And they do the same work. There aren't any differences. So the argument was empty, and I think he thought this about some philosophical arguments, too.
Well, that sounds plausible. Lots of empiricists of various tribes have believed things like that. What's the implausible part?
Well, by my lights, the implausible part is the pragmatic theory of truth. This is the idea that what makes a belief true is the fact that it works. James says truth is good because we can write it into the future. Well, I just don't think that's right. I think the reason that belief in the truth is helpful is because truth is what corresponds with the facts. And maybe it's not so helpful in every case.
Well, right. Sometimes truth is unhelpful, and sometimes falsity is very helpful. But you're a mad dog realist, so I'm not surprised you don't find James plausible in the pragmatic theory of truth.
Well, Ken, we've just touched the surface with William James, but in a moment we'll be joined by a real scholar who can take us a little bit deeper. That's Russell Goodman from the University of New Mexico.
And we'd love to have you join in this conversation, too. 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or, as always, you can email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
But first, our roving philosophical reporter, Julie Napolin, explores one of James's ideas that had a huge influence outside philosophy, the stream of consciousness. She files this report.
In his book, The Principles of Psychology, William James makes the radical move to say that consciousness isn't always linear or logical. On a daily basis, we are all immersed in what he calls the stream of thought.
For James, thought has kind of an uneven rhythm, that it will sort of move quickly and abruptly and kind of in not quite clear ways across a bunch of associations, and then sort of stop for a moment and reach a conclusion, and then start up again and rush to another conclusion.
Mitchell Breitwieser is an English professor at UC Berkeley.
He likened the pacing of the stream of consciousness to a bird flying from limb to limb, sort of perching and flying, and that attention to the kind of feel of that part of our thinking that we're always doing but aren't always aware of.
Around the turn of the 20th century, novelists became interested in James's idea of the stream of thought. Stephen Arkin is an English professor at San Francisco State University.
These shifts towards a sense of the crucial nature of interiority, the layered sense of what it meant to have consciousness, invited writers to think about what they might do in addressing how to present this on the page.
The Irish prose writer James Joyce was one of them.
Joyce was very, very taken with the idea of representing that flow.
In 1922, Joyce wrote Ulysses, an 800-page novel that takes place in 24 hours as two men, Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus, wander around Dublin. With only a loose plot and no narrator telling us what to think, Joyce turned radically against the traditional novel.
He was convinced that portraying consciousness involved working with a flow or a stream, a sense that there is an interior monologue going on that's very associative, that involves picking up notions that may wander so far afield that it's hard really to know how these things are related, other than as the preoccupation of someone getting through a day.
In Ulysses, the world of the characters rushes at you, the way Dublin smells, tastes, sounds, and feels from moment to moment.
What you get is a very, very different emphasis on what character is. It's less a matter of how characters are situated in a particular physical world, and much more a matter of how characters perceive the world.
In one episode, Leopold Bloom walks into a church and is suddenly bombarded by a stream of associations, remembering bits and pieces of songs. Stephen Arkin gives his best Irish brogue.
Some of that old sacred music is splendid. Mercadante, Seven Last Words, Mozart's 12th Mass, the Gloria in that. Those old popes were keen on music, on art and statues and pictures of all kinds. Palestrina, for example, too. They had a gay old time while it lasted. Healthy, too, chanting, regular hours. Still, having eunuchs in their choir work, that was coming it a bit thick. What kind of voice is it? It must be curious to hear after their own strong basses. He reminds us that we all seem to walk around with an interior soundtrack.
Again, Mitchell Breitwieser from Berkeley.
One of the things that gets left behind is the idea that we necessarily think in sentences or even in words.
For both Breitwieser and Arkin, this cuts to the heart of philosopher William James's discovery.
There is, for William James, a kind of musicality in terms of motifs come and go and get reprised and so on. And there's a kind of a flowingness.
What does it mean to walk through the world with a constant playing stream of thoughts, of associations, of recollections, some that seem highly specific and some that seem extraordinarily fragmented and vague, all of which amount to this thing we call ourselves?
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Julie Napolin.
I'm John Perry, and with me is Ken Taylor.
Our guest today is Russell Goodman. He's the Regents Professor of Philosophy at the University of New Mexico, author of Wittgenstein and William James. Russell, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks very much for having me on. Glad to be here.
Russell, just briefly, how did you get interested in William James?
Well, it was so long ago, I can't really remember. I think I read Varieties of Religious Experience in college, and remember being struck by sort of the history of religious enthusiasm that he dealt with there. I mean, the book is all about religious experience as a part of human life, and it's a great survey of examples of this. So I had that in the background, and I probably taught a little bit in epistemology courses that I was offering. But I always found James a little weird, and it wasn't until, I don't know, 15, 20 years out of graduate school that I found a way to use him. And first was thinking of him as a romantic, an idea which I got by hearing Stanley Cavell talk about Emerson and Wordsworth, and I realized, well, William James is kind of a romantic too, and led to the first book I wrote, and then...
Your entry into William James had to do with religion and your interest in aesthetics.
Well, yes and no, because I think, like a lot of people trained in analytic philosophy, I can't get epistemology out of my head. So yes, aesthetics, yes, religion, but as components of our stance with relation to the world, or the way we understand the world, really. So I think what James thinks is that religious experience is a way of understanding the world, one among many.
So tell us now a little bit about James. He was first a physiologist,
sure,
then a psychologist, then a philosopher. What led to these transitions?
Well, I'll actually start a little earlier. He was an artist first. He was actually committed to being a painter, moved back. He was quite good at it, and moved back from Europe, dragged his family back, or had his father drag his family back when he was a teenager, to study painting in Newport. And then, for reasons that are not totally clear, he abandoned painting and went into scientific training.
Maybe he wasn't very good at it, you know.
Well, he was pretty good at it. If you look at some of the books on James, he was a great oil painter. But I guess I'd have to say he's not as great a painter as he was whatever he is.
Right, right. You know, people should know that his brother is Henry James, the great
Yes,
novelist.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, which was older?
Yeah.
Who was it?
William was first by about a year and a half.
So maybe his brother's literary talents made him feel he ought to get into academia instead of competing. I don't know, but
right. Well, it's often said that one of them was a great psychologist and one of them was a great literary figure, and take your pick about which description you apply to which person,
okay.
Because they were both that way.
So what led him into philosophy?
Well, good question. I think he was always there in a way, and he's one of the philosophers of whom there are some number. Wittgenstein is another who never studied philosophy. He did it all on his own. He went to medical school after his chemistry degree, basically, but his first publications were philosophical. So he read stuff. He was in Germany a lot. He knew German, so he read Schopenhauer, Kant, Hegel. He certainly read Hume and Mill. But it was all on his own. And you said very nicely in your introduction that his writing, that he doesn't have the complete control of his writing that one would expect from a certain kind of professional philosopher, from a professional philosopher. I think he never had complete control over his life. It was always like the stream of thought sort of spilling over.
So I was picking up, but in my readings of James, I have picked up something real about him, that he does kind of lack the kind of control that a super sophisticated philosopher like Kant or Hume has. But you're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're discussing the philosophy of William James with Russell Goodman from the University of New Mexico.
William James seems to say that it's okay to believe in immortality and the existence of God if having those beliefs will make your life better. That's what he calls the will to believe. Does that make any sense to you? Are some of your beliefs ones you hold because they make your life go better rather than because you have really good evidence for them? Join us by calling toll-free at 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
The ideas of William James, the will to believe, the stream of consciousness, the pragmatic theory of truth, the variety of religious experience, plus your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
The idea of a stream of consciousness was identified by the philosopher William James. And that's who we're talking about today. Is your consciousness an unbridled stream, a blooming, buzzing confusion like Ken's? Or is it a well-ordered filing cabinet, an organized treatise, a to-do list with orderly check marks like mine? I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. In religion, William James distinguished between the healthy-minded and the sick-minded. Which are you? Is your religion a shield, or does it provide you with an impulse to get out in the world and do some good? The toll-free number, 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our guest today is Russell Goodman, author of American Philosophy and the Romantic Tradition.
So, Russell, I want to get into James's ideas of pragmatism, but I want to phrase it in a different way. Look, his animating concerns seem to be multifarious. He was concerned with religion, with science, with ordinary conscious experience. Is the philosopher of pragmatism, which many people think of as a kind of scientific philosophy, how does it help tie all these animating concerns together?
Well, big question. I think James always was a scientific philosopher, but he had a very wide notion of science, and he also thought science didn't do everything that you could do. And I guess he saw pragmatism as a more overarching theory that would give an understanding of science, but also an understanding of religion and ethics.
So help me divide and conquer here. So. Yeah. I think we can easily understand how pragmatism helps with science, observation and experiment, what works in theory construction. How does it help with religion? How does religion get into this picture?
Well, I'd go back to science for a little bit, because one of the features of his picture is what we now call holism. He thought of our knowledge as a system. And so the system includes science, but it also includes what he calls common sense. And it also may include, for some people at least, religion. He sort of oscillates between thinking of the system as public, something that we all share, and one that we sort of form for ourselves. But the advantage of pragmatism is that almost anything can go in the system and be part of your way of making your way through the world.
Is that because works is relative to our purposes? So believe what works. The truth is what works. Well, what works in what context? So different contexts can have. Is that what it's about?
Yeah, yes, I think so. Believe what works is a little too, quick and dirty as an account. He does want to introduce the long run. He does understand that certain things that are false might seem to be working for a while and then blow up in your face. So he wants that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, or would want to say, is that the pragmatic theory of truth has problems that you bring out, but that there are other sides of his pragmatism. And so understanding a kind of broader notion of the way we understand the world is something that could be independent of the pragmatic theory of truth.
So let me focus a little bit on this idea of the will to believe. He says that sometimes we're confronted with options that are, let's see, forced, momentous, and genuine, and that's when the will to believe can come in. What was he getting at there?
Yeah. Well, he said that he should have later, because this was a very controversial paper, and he later said he should have called it the right to believe. And so the idea that you kind of could will yourself into believing is not something that he himself believes, and it's not true. I mean, he's quite clear on the fact that I can't, believe there's an elephant in the room just at my will. But he did want to justify. It's an article about justification, and I don't buy the whole thing, but I like to talk not about religion, where I'm not sure I want to follow him, but into something else he talks about, namely, you might say romance is one example. And he gives the example of courting a member of the opposite sex. He's really thinking of a guy courting a woman. And you have the right to believe that she's going to love you back, even in that momentous situation, even when you don't have the evidence for it. And the big claim he wants to make is that believing that she's going to love you back will contribute in some way to making it so.
Let's explore this a little bit. Certainly, you don't have the right to act on the belief that she will love you back. I mean, they call that, they have terms for that aren't pleasant anymore, right? Right. And I mean, you might assume that she will love you back, and that might keep you going or somehow. And that might be a useful assumption, but he thinks that makes it true or something, right?
It's actually really a causal claim, I think. I think he does think you have the right to act on the belief in an appropriate manner. And I think he wants to say, the action wouldn't be the sort of action that might do the trick unless you had the belief in the first place. And so so you can get, to put it rather crudely, you can get someone to love you if you manifest your love and belief that the love will follow first. It's a kind of this thing happens and then this thing follows.
He says we have the right to believe at our own risk any hypothesis that is live enough to tempt our will. So I suppose if he was faced in modern times with drawing the line between undue optimism and sexual harassment, it would be that phrase, at our own risk. Right. So you can be very nice to someone with the hope that she'll return your attentions, but you shouldn't put her at risk.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about the philosophy of William James with our guest, Russell Goodman, and we'd love to have you join this discussion. The number to do so is 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or, as always, you can email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. And Mo in Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Mo.
Hello. Yeah, very good discussion. I was just kind of responding to your question about whether we can have some beautiful vision, like I have a vision of happy freedom, and I can, I feel that's useful, so therefore I can work toward it, based on having different shape-shifting, different perspectives, and then having a general inference of happy freedom. And I call this the indiscoverant. When every time you discover something, you invent it, and every time you invent something, you discover something. So the whole thing of pragmatism, to me, is from my interpretation, a limited interpretation, contingent interpretation, is that we're continually in that irony of our own personal nature, but we're continually making up things as we're finding things, and as we find things, and that's my idea of why pragmatism works.
Mo, that's a mouthful. I'm going to let Russell respond to that. Thanks for the call.
Yeah. Well, I think that's basically right, Mo. I think he does blur the line between discovery and creation. And that's part of his pragmatism that he calls humanism. And you can also think of this as something akin to Kant. We make up the world that we don't make up the world, but we structure or in some way inform the world that we then register. He says that. And it's a little hard to swallow, but it's certainly I think it's worth swallowing. But he thinks that we can't distinguish the world from our human interests in it and our human apprehension of it. As he puts it in a slogan that was taken up by later pragmatist Hilary Putnam, the trail of the human serpent is over everything.
So Russell or I don't know, Sarah Palin, somebody said that consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds, and I don't want to accuse James of having a small mind, but I do worry about consistency here. Yeah. That is, take immortality. A lot of people would find their life goes better if they believe in immortality. For many people, it's a genuine option, and they feel they have to make up their minds about it. So it's in the category of things he thinks you have a right to believe. But on the other hand, when we get back to that pragmatist theory of meaning, what experiences could you have that would be different if you were immortal, or if God exists? If he can't identify some of those experiences, doesn't he have to say the belief is meaningless? And if it's meaningless, how can we have the right to believe it?
Yeah, well, it would be for him. And that was Emerson, by the way. The foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Thank you.
Adored by little statesmen, philosophers, and divines. That's us. No, I think James rejected abstract religious theology precisely because their conception of God didn't make any difference in people's lives. For him, if the notion of God has a meaning, it is going to be in your experience. And so this is the way in which the approach that we've been talking as a sort of pragmatic approach to religion actually folds into or coincides with the approach he takes in Varieties of Religious Experience, where he's studying the effects on people's lives of, in some sense, belief in God, or what he But he was troubled by the question that you're pushing, and that I'm slightly dodging here. He was troubled by the question with this question. I mean, suppose this belief in religion makes your life better. It changes you morally. It changes you as far as your happiness is concerned. Does that prove that there's a God doing any of this? And I think he was worried about that question, and he didn't. We can tell that he was inclined to want to say yes, but he never really did. I think he.
So before we get off this topic, just say a couple words about the healthy-minded, sick-minded distinction, if I have those terms right.
Yeah. Well, James always was a great psychologist, and he used these little psychological characterizations. You mentioned tough-minded, tender-minded, to make sense of phenomena. So the healthy-minded religious types, as he put it, for them, the world has a sky blue tint, and they look on all things and see that it's good. So the world is totally good, and in its essential being. And the sick souls, or the twice born, as he sees them, have a sense of evil in the world. The phrase that I always talk to my students about is that for the sick souls, radical evil gets its innings, which I think is probably a cricket term. Radical evil gets its innings, and so you do not eliminate evil from the world, and you have to recognize that it's present. And sick souls have that consciousness of evil. So even if they're religious, so his examples are the Buddha and Christians, particularly Jonathan Edwards, Tolstoy, who have some sense. The sick souls, the twice born, have a sense of evil as ineliminable, but nevertheless, in some sense, overcome. Overcome's not going.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about the philosophy of William James with our guest Russell Goodman, and we'd love to have you join this conversation. 1-800-525-9917, or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. And Don in San Francisco's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Yes, thank you very much. It's an exciting day. I feel like a freshman in a graduate seminar. My question is about beliefs. I don't think we believe in science. I think science is. I think the only thing that we believe about is what we don't understand or we don't know. And in belief, the word lie exists. And that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, John. So we don't believe in science. So I wouldn't. James deeply believes in science, but he wants us to rightly understand what science is up to and about. Isn't that right, Russell?
Yeah, and one of the things James introduces early there in the Pragmatism book, earlier in our century, is a historical account of science. This is one of the reasons why I think people, after the writing of Thomas Kuhn on the history of science, looked back to James, because he thinks of our scientific categories as having a history, and in that sense being somewhat contingent, even though they are responding to the world. So it is belief. And a feature of all the pragmatists is fallibilism. We can get things wrong, and we do get things wrong.
But it's not as though, and the world for James, see if I've got this right. The world, you talked about this in passing, but I want to focus on it a little bit more. The world for James is not like completely ready-made and already so, and science just kind of reflects what is already so, right? Because somehow the world is made by us. Partly by, not out of just nothing, but by materials that are somehow already to hand, but we do a lot of creating.
We're making sense of this from the day we're born, of this blooming, buzzing confusion.
Right, and
that's exactly right.
We're throwing out concepts, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But in throwing out the concepts, we're not just reflecting the way the world antecedently is in its own nature or something like that, but somehow construing the world. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly the way to put it. The blooming, buzzing confusion is there all around us, and we have these. He thinks of concepts as tools that we use to sort of slice up reality or slice up what comes into us and make sense of it. And there is something out there that fights back. And if the tools don't work, then we're going to have to change our conceptual tools. Now, so definitely.
There's also a couple other things we got to mention here. One, of course, is we should say something about Peirce, just that Peirce was a big influence on James on this pragmatism. But secondly, a lot of people nowadays particularly equate science with physicalism, the idea that the physical world is all that's real. That's quite contrary to James. He really he really pushed this idea of what we're most sure about is consciousness, and then that evolved into something called neutral monism. Can you tell us what neutral monism is?
In 1 minute or less?
Yes, neutral monism is a term that was coined by Bertrand Russell to describe the theory that he took explicitly from James. It's a metaphysical view that James developed sort of after and alongside of his pragmatism. It's the view that reality is neither physical nor mental. It's neutral, and that the physical and mental are, as it were, poles or precipitates out of this more fundamental neutral stuff.
Are they our ways of taking this neutral stuff? I mean, because if we construct the world, do we construct it through taking it as mental or taking it as physical or something like that?
I think so. Okay. I think so.
Well, on that note, you're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing the philosophy of William James with Russell Goodman from the University of New Mexico. He's author of American Philosophy and the Romantic Tradition, and also James and Wittgenstein.
James is one of the great figures in American intellectual history. He influenced philosophy, of course, but also psychology and also the study of religion. Ideas we use every day probably derived from James. Next, we're going to consider one of his influences that was quite large, his influence on American consciousness, including literature.
The impact of William James when Philosophy Talk continues.
I can call you Daddy when you call me.
Do you like stream of consciousness songs? Do you like stream of consciousness novels? Then you've been influenced by William James. Are you a teacher teaching under the influence of the later pragmatist John Dewey? Then you've been influenced by William James. Share the influence of James and pragmatism and the stream of consciousness on your life with us. I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is Russell Goodman from the University of New Mexico. And we've got a caller on the line now, Jay in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Jay.
I had a question regarding the historical context of William James in terms of his pragmatism, which might even be a little bit of lead to relativism in some ways, but just the consequence of the Civil War and people dying for ideas and that issue around shaping his ideas.
Well, okay, Jay, thanks for that. So, Russell, tell us both about, this is a good question because we can ask both about the setting in which James came up with the idea of pragmatism, and Jay mentioned how it might lead to relativism and all that, and people like Richard Rorty would say yes, yes, yes. So take that question and run with it for a bit.
Yeah, good. Well, I'll start with the relativism first. This always comes up. This is the question that comes up about pragmatism. Aren't you just a relativist? What works for me may not work for you, and if there's no sort of nature that we can get at directly, then isn't this just sort of making up different stories? And that sounds a little bit like our contemporary or recently deceased neo-pragmatist Richard Rorty. So both early in the time of James and late towards the end of the 20th century, when we have these neo-pragmatists, Putnam and Rorty, the question of relativism is huge, and so it is a big issue, and they're always defending themselves against it. But of course, the question is coming up because of some of the things that they say.
So does James explicitly address? I mean, Peirce had this thing about what in the long run, and he seemed to believe in some kind of convergence. Rational thinkers inquiring will converge at the ideal limit of inquiry. Is there something like anything like that in James?
Well, James had James had this term pluralism. Was that his term for relativism?
Yes. Two questions. Well, James took Peirce's long-run view of truth up and accepts it in pragmatism. So he does think that there's a convergence. And that truth will be the final human opinion, which is a kind of an ideal that we may or may not arrive at after we've done all our experimentation. That's a common view to both Peirce and James. You could call that the long-run view of truth, rather than truth is what works.
So in the long run, will all divergence and pluralism and diversity of opinion just wash out? And why would anybody believe that in advance?
Right. Well, I don't believe that. I mean, I think one of the things that has changed in discussion of this long-run idea, I think James and Peirce both thought that there would be one final system at the end point of inquiry, and I don't see any reason to believe that there would be just one. There might be several.
So take the other part of Jay's. Is
the context?
So is James sort of spring whole cloth, a new way of thinking, or does it have historical antecedents? Was he influenced by what was happening around him? What was going on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think he's a pretty original guy, actually. I think he really is. Part of that out of control aspect of him is that he's just an idea creator. Sources, people talk about the Civil War. I don't, which he was born in 1842, so just missed out on it. His brothers were in there. One of them was the head of a black regiment and got wounded. I don't know that my reading of it, the Civil War isn't a big factor. I think Darwinian science is a big factor. He's a Darwinian, as is Peirce. I actually also I work on Emerson. I think Emerson is a factor. This is part of the romantic link and the sort of self-reliant, optimistic side of James. Certainly Charles Sanders Peirce, who was his friend in Cambridge, slightly older, 3 years older, was an influence. And Peirce and James are usually thought of as the two co-founders of pragmatism in the 70s, in the 1870s. So that's part of the context. And that context is a very scientific context.
Right.
So with James, you get hard science, you get chemistry, you get art, you get literature, you get psychology, and you get medicine. And it's all...
One of the things that James seemed really concerned to do was, you mentioned the connection with Romanticism. He seemed to believe that science had the potential to kind of deaden the world and turn it into and make us see it as a mere mechanism. But religion had this vitalizing thing, and which science was driving out. And he seemed to want to re-romanticize the world while retaining science. Is that?
I think that's exactly right. I think that's right. And so he shares with the Romantics in the early 19th century that idea that somehow science has disenchanted the world. And he looks to religion. It's interesting. A lot of the Romantics look to art for that re-enchantment. James, despite his career as an artist, or his broken off career as an artist, didn't really go that way. But I think that's right. It's a critique of science rather than a rejection of it.
Vincent in Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Vincent. I know you've been waiting a while. What's your comment or question?
Hi. Couple of questions. First one is when I've read Wittgenstein, he talks about meaning as use, the meaning of a phrase or a sentence being related to use. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between him and Wittgenstein. And James in that way. And the second question is, given what he says, what James says, it seems that whether you think his system is true, it depends upon whether you think he's done you any good.
Well, right. That's a clever question. So Russell, I don't know much about I know you're writing a book about Wittgenstein and James, but my impression is that Wittgenstein had this kind of disdain for James for some reason. But tell me more about that.
Well, it's a very complicated story, and that's why I was able to write a book about it, because there's lots to talk about. It's interesting. The phrase did me a lot of good is one that Wittgenstein uttered in a famous letter, or maybe not so famous, but a 1912 letter to Bertrand Russell when he was just starting philosophy at Cambridge, and he read Varieties of Religious Experience and reported to Russell that it did him a lot of good. And it's just a postcard, so one doesn't really quite know how. And he always loved that book, was recommending it to students throughout his life. But he was critical of James, and it's not clear he ever read Pragmatism. He was afraid of pragmatism, or he hated pragmatism without quite knowing what it was. Yeah. But there are these kind of a couple of plaintive little questions that Wittgenstein has, where he literally asks himself in uncertainty, aren't you a pragmatist? Or I'm saying something that sounds like pragmatism. So he did see or sense some sort of connection between pragmatism and his philosophy, and he didn't like that.
And he never really does he ever anywhere ever directly head-on addresses James' works? Because, like I said, my casual reading of Wittgenstein, I get the sense that he thought there was something very wrong with it. But
you get that because he does address James's works in his late unpublished work, Philosophical Investigations. So James is mentioned 4 times in that book, more than anybody else except for St. Augustine. So James is a kind of subject in the book, but it's almost always critical.
Yeah.
And so I think with Wittgenstein and James, you have to look at pragmatism, which he hated, but he probably never read that book. You have to look at the Varieties of Religious Experience, which he loved and which I think had an influence on the Tractatus, his first book. And you have to look at the Principles of Psychology, to which most of the references in philosophical investigations are. And he was teaching at the end of the war, or after World War II, when Wittgenstein came to Oxford, he was lecturing on the Principles of Psychology, mostly critically. But I think this is part of the argument in my book that, yes, he was critical for good reasons of James's psychologism in the Principles of Psychology, but he also learned a lot from William James.
So it sounds like Wittgenstein, a bit like Ken and I, admires James maybe more for his psychology than for his philosophy, although I think my own view is Wittgenstein and James have one thing in common. They both leave a lot of details hanging. But anyway.
Russell,
Right.
on that note, I'm going to thank you for joining us. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it, too.
Our guest has been Russell Goodman, Regents Professor of Philosophy at the University of New Mexico, author of Wittgenstein and William James, which we were just talking about. So, John, what did you learn today?
Well, I learned a lot today in preparing for the program. I read James' psychology when I was a student, like Russell did, the Varieties of Religious Experience, and I always found it very inspiring. I really found his philosophy disappointing when I went at it from the point of view of a teacher. I thought I should get some James into my intro course, and I just didn't find anything I thought was very helpful. But returning to it now, maybe when I'm older and wiser, I actually found it a lot more interesting and engaging. And I really, what we were talking about at the end, Russell and Wittgenstein, with Russell about Wittgenstein and James, that's fascinating, and I didn't know that story. I'm going to look into his new book.
Yeah, my interest is re-peaked in James. I guess partly it's because I think I've become more of a pragmatist and a relativist in my old age. And so, I'm always looking for antecedents to my pragmatic relativism, which keeps growing in me. And when I was young and would read some of James, I would say, I have better things to do, and I never really dug into the Varieties of Religious Experience, but that sounds like a really great read, and I think we should put it on our next summer reading list or something like that. But this conversation continues on our Facebook page, and we'd love you to become a member of our Facebook community. It's growing and growing and growing. It's up to many hundreds, and why don't you join us too?
And, you can download podcasts of our program from our website. That's philosophytalk.org. You'll enjoy the podcast. We clean them up a little, so if there's any glitches that annoyed you in the program, you won't find them in the podcast. And with that...
John, you hear that drumming? That signals my favorite time of the show. It's time for a conundrum.
A conundrum is where a listener calls in with a problem, and we use philosophy to help them solve it.
And we've got a caller on the line now. Welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Hello.
So tell us your name and where you're calling from.
My name is Sean. I'm calling from Vancouver, Washington.
Ooh, cool. Vancouver, Washington. That's right up there next to Portland, right?
Right.
And what do you do up there in Vancouver, Washington, right next to Portland?
Brew beer and stay out of the rain.
You're a professional beer brewer?
No, I'm a home brewer.
A home brewer.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
So what's your conundrum?
Well, I wondered whether someone who says they never lie can be telling the truth.
Well, if they never lie, they can be. I mean, what do you mean?
Well,
why is that a conundrum?
When my wife and I got married, we had a circumstance where each of us lied to the other one and was caught doing so by the other person.
Okay.
And we made a commitment to each other that we would never lie again.
Okay.
I then kind of internalized that and applied it to everything in my life with the idea that I should never lie about anything.
And since then, you've lost job after job and friend after friend.
I'm not a very popular guy in some circumstances.
Yeah.
Oh, so what you're really asking is whether one could really hold oneself in the real world to a commandment of never lying. Is that what you're really asking?
So, I mean, if you define a lie as an untruth, and then you go by what the witnesses ask, or do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, it'd be pretty hard not to lie. I mean, I try to tell the truth, and most of the time nothing but the truth, but I really have no interest in telling the whole truth to most people about most things.
And most people don't have an interest in hearing the whole truth about the whole thing, most things. I mean, your wife asked, how does my new hairdo look? How does my dress look? I mean, if you think it's awful, you'd be a fool to say it looks awful. Don't you think, Sean?
I generally couch it in less harmful terms.
Well, so you try to soft pedal the truth. Is that?
Yeah,
what
and that's kind of what I was getting at. Is omission a lie?
Well, Ken makes a very good point, as usual. Lying is a matter of talking to other people, and talking is really not so simple as it seems. There's always different speech acts involved. Is my wife looking for a little reassurance or a compliment, or is it a situation, as Ken describes, where she really wants my analytic, honest opinion? I really can hardly think it counts as a lie if somebody's fishing for a compliment and you kind of go out of your way to say something not too inaccurate.
Yeah, so, I don't think it's a yes or no simple thing. I do think sometimes the setting gives you license and may even require you to withhold information, right, about your attitude, about your thoughts or evaluation. I hate to sound like a situational ethicist or anything like that, but I think it's very situational.
Here's a completely hypothetical example. You're kind of an old philosopher, beaten down by time and thinking your entire life, and you've decided, well, the world's meaningless, there is no God, and we're all just bleeped. You're teaching an intro course, and the students say, do you believe in God? Do you believe there's meaning in the world? Is life worth living? What are you supposed to say? Oh, no, there's no God. The universe is meaningless. And, I know you're going through adolescent angst and you're very sensitive, but I just have to tell you the truth. It's just a bunch of bleep.
Well, on that
No,
one...
you shouldn't say that. You
Well,
should
yes,
say,
you
oh,
should.
well, you should kind of prevaricate. You should say, well, I've thought about it a lot, and sometimes I feel one way and sometimes I feel another, and it's a very interesting question. You should decide for yourself.
Well, on that one, I disagree with you, John. I think you should rub their nose in the meaninglessness of existence and get them depressed and ready for what's about to assault them. But what do you think about that, Sean?
When I was at school in Montana, one of my philosophy professors introduced me to the idea of the festering falsehood.
The festering falsehood.
That's nice and alliterative, but what is it?
The idea is that lies fester in darkness, and misinformation festers in darkness, and that the only way to live like a pure, fully realized life is to never have any falsehood fester.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you see,
to the light of day and burn it out.
Yeah.
Well, there is a practical matter. It's usually easier to stick to your story if it's true than keep trying to remember what exactly lies you've told.
Exactly.
Now, Ken, didn't your philosopher Kant, one of your favorites, didn't he say that if somebody came to the door and said, where's your father? I want to shoot him, that even then you shouldn't lie. You shouldn't say, oh, he's not here, he's vacationing in Portland.
Which just proves one thing, that even the smartest, deepest thinkers in the world can say the most boneheaded, dumb things. Sean, I hope we've helped you think some about your challenging question.
You have. Thank you very much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you have a philosophical problem or quandary that's affecting your work or your play or keeping you awake at nights, John and I would be happy to lend an ear and maybe give you some sound advice.
Go to the Philosophy Talk website and poke the conundrums button with your mouse, or just send an email to conundrums@philosophytalk.org. Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2008.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Our production coordinator is Devin Strolovich. Daniel Elstein is our director of research. Leo Weiss is our webmaster. Also thanks to Zoe Corneli, Merle Kessler, Corey Golden, and Mark Stone.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Templeton Foundation.
And from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and the members of KALW San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.